Imagine your brother crashes and kills someone, but your parents want you to take the blame. Betrayed by the people who should protect you, I faced a choice: sacrifice myself or expose their dark secrets. What I uncovered changed everything. This is my story of loyalty, betrayal, and fighting back. I want to share my story with you. I'd always thought nothing could break me harder than losing my job on the same day my fiancé walked out on me, but that was before I got the call. My sister-in-law's voice was shaking like a kid who just swallowed a wasp. She told me to get to the hospital, that something terrible had happened. My stomach clenched as I dropped my phone into my pocket and sprinted through the parking lot. Inside, the bright fluorescent lights felt like they were burning my skin. My mother held my brother's hand in the emergency hallway, tears streaked down her makeup. His leg was in a brace, blood seeping through the bandages, but it wasn't the injury that set my heart pounding. It was the cop standing at the nurse's station, his expression grim, the badge shining in the overhead light. They told me my brother, the golden child, had killed someone. A cyclist, a young woman delivering newspapers at dawn. The kind of person who greeted you with an innocent smile before handing you the money for your morning coffee. Witnesses said he'd been speeding, swerved, then slammed into her and kept going. Hit and run, he didn't even look back. He was drunk, they said, more drunk than he'd ever been. The evidence was piling up: camera footage from a nearby gas station, skid marks on the pavement, the victim's shattered life. I looked at my brother's face, his cheekbone cut open, and for a moment I saw fear. Not panic or regret, something darker, a flicker of cold calculation. My parents arrived, dragging in their lawyer like he was a trophy at a racetrack. My dad's suit was crisp, his tie straight. My mother wrung her hands, though her nails were perfectly manicured. They both looked at me with that same wild-eyed plea. "You'll do something right, you'll help us protect him." I tried to speak, but my throat was too tight. All I could do was nod. I'd cover for him, I'd say I was driving, I'd lie to the cops if I had to. Anything to protect what was left of my shattered family. They spilled out the details in urgent whispers. My brother had been desperate, business was failing, debts had piled up. He was supposed to meet an investor that morning, one who had promised to save the company. He'd been drinking champagne at dawn, celebrating before tragedy struck. They asked how drunk I thought someone would need to be to smash a bike under their wheel and drive off. I stuttered, tried to imagine the answers. Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of every witness statement resting on my shoulders. I could almost taste the conviction, the metallic bitterness of prison bars. But then I saw it flash in my mind, what they were asking me to do, not just a cover story. They wanted me to confess. They'd file a report saying I drove the car that morning. They'd depaint him as the victim of a panic attack, an accident that spiraled out of control. Then they'd turn their sympathies to me. I'd be the poor son, scarred by a mistake, not the favored one. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how hollow their solution was. It would ruin me. It would destroy my life in a way they could never imagine. And besides, they weren't just covering it up. They were planning to bury me under it. I can't say exactly when the first hint of doubt crept in. Maybe it was when I saw my mother's trembling hand slip a stack of cash into my coat pocket. Maybe it was the way my dad's eyes flicked past me, searching for some sign that I'd be compliant. They sounded so earnest, so convinced that they were saving my brother from his own destruction. But I sensed the calculation, the cold logic that they'd sacrifice me to salvage their reputation. My brother watched it all through half-lidded eyes, as if he already knew the script they'd written for me. He didn't apologize, didn't flinch when he saw the horror in my face. He just whispered, "I owe you one." That was him, the golden child, charming, entitled, poisonous underneath. Driving home, I nearly crashed my car. My mind raced with possibilities. I wished I could just walk away, disappear, leave them to face the fallout. But I was trapped in a twisted loyalty, the kind you can't untangle. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a long while, staring at the house where I grew up. I heard every argument, every betrayal, every secret they'd carefully hidden behind closed doors. And I wondered how long it had been since I was more than just their scapegoat in training. I told myself I'd do what they asked. I'd pull the trigger on the confession. But a knot tightened in my chest, a defiance I hadn't felt in years. Because even as I considered signing my own death warrant, I realized there was another option, one they never saw coming. I could fight back. I could gather the proof of their conspiracy, watch them squirm when the evidence came out. I could bring them down in the most public, irreversible way imaginable. That thought both terrified and exhilarated me. And then I remembered the dash cam footage I'd installed on my own car months ago for no particular reason. I remembered the witness who'd taken pictures with her phone before she collapsed on the road. I remembered the text messages my father had sent my mother, outlining a plan to pin everything on me. They left digital footprints, and I was determined to follow everyone. Because if they thought I'd be their sacrificial lamb, they were about to learn just how dangerous a desperate brother could be. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and whispered to the empty car, "Let's see how this ends." I remember that evening like one of those nightmares you wake from gasping but can't shake what you saw. My parents called me into the study, Dad behind his polished mahogany desk, Mom hovering by the window as if she needed a view to hide behind. My brother leaned against the wall, arms crossed, face almost smug. The air smelled of old leather and stale coffee. I sat in the chair they pushed my way and waited for the blow to land. My heart pounded so loud I could swear the walls were echoing it back at me. Dad cleared his throat, the lawyer beside him shifted papers. Son, he began in that calm, practiced tone that always told me I was in trouble. But this time they weren't calling me out for some teenage prank or failed business deal. They were about to ask me to sacrifice my entire life. We need you to understand how serious this is, he said, eyes boring into mine. Your brother's future, our family's name, it's all at stake. There's a way out, but it requires you to step up. Mom stepped forward, her voice trembling like she was terrified to speak. We've thought it through. You're our best option. You don't have a record. You haven't built a life we can't replace if you slip up. This, for us, is a minor hiccup compared to what he stands to lose. She sounded almost relieved. I felt like I'd swallowed a fistful of glass. The lawyer laid out the plan in cold, clinical detail. They would file a police report saying I was behind the wheel that morning. Dad would produce a forged GPS log showing my car on that street at the time of impact. Mom would tweak the security footage from the neighborhood watch camera. She already knew a guy at the station who owed her a favor. My brother's expensive lawyer buddy would handle the hush money to witnesses, offering cash for their silence. They'd stage a tearful confession video for the local news, making me look like the troubled younger brother who'd made one terrible mistake. Then, once public sympathy swung my way, they'd quietly push for probation or minimal sentencing. When Dad mentioned the forged GPS logs, I saw the flicker of excitement in his eyes. When Mom spoke of the hush money, her voice softened into a pat on the back like she was praising me for taking one for the team. My brother just smirked and said, "It's what you do for me, right?" As if this twisted sacrifice was the easiest request in the world. I tried to speak, my mouth was dry, my tongue heavy. You want me to go to prison for something I didn't do? My voice sounded distant. Mom's eyes flooded with tears, Oscar-worthy tears, but I knew she was crying for the future they'd saved, not for the injustice they'd engineered. Dad leaned in. It's simple, you confess. The evidence is airtight. We'll all say you snapped under stress. The prosecutor will eat it up. You'll serve a short sentence. You'll come out, you'll rebuild, and we'll be right here waiting for you. His hand hovered over the desk as if gently pressing down on my fate. My brother chuckled. Plus, think of the headline, family scandal, young man's redemption. We'll spin it as your triumphant comeback story. People love that. He tossed a set of printed statements onto the desk, witness IDs, photos, financial spreadsheets. It was grotesque, my life erased and rewritten in my family's favor. The last blow was Mom's gentle whisper. We love you, we need you, you're our baby. This is your chance to prove your loyalty. Her hand brushed my arm. It was the touch of a mother begging her child to die for her. I felt my stomach drop, nausea rising in my throat. This wasn't loyalty. It was betrayal, a premeditated execution of my future. I sat there, fists clenched, feeling like a puppet with every string pulled tight. They thought they'd broken me already. But in that split second, staring at my parents and my brother, watching their eyes flicker with greed and self-preservation, I realized they'd underestimated one thing: me. They didn't know I'd spent the last week piecing together their secrets, tracing every message, filming every whispered instruction. They didn't know that as they spoke, I was already forming my own plan. I nodded slowly, allowed Dad to lean back satisfied. All right, I said, voice hollow, I'll do it. Just like that, I agreed to become their inside man. I saw the relief wash over them, the satisfaction that their plan was on track. My brother grinned at me, his victory complete. But beneath that calm yes, my mind was racing. I would confess, I would play their game, but I was collecting my arsenal right then in that room. Hidden in my coat pocket was a voice recorder capturing every word. On my phone, secure and encrypted, I had copies of their emails plotting the frame-up. I was taking their poison and turning it into my weapon. As I got up to leave the study, Dad patted my shoulder with a fatherly grin. Thank you, son, he said. And I walked out pretending to be the broken kid they'd always wanted me to be, while inside I was burning with righteous fury. Because they'd made the unthinkable ask and I'd accepted on my own terms. My next move would be their worst nightmare. I sat on the edge of my bed after that meeting, the room spinning with the weight of their expectations. My knees shook so violently I thought they'd buckle under me. I pressed my palms into the mattress, trying to stop the tremor, trying to make my heart slow down so I could think straight, but my chest felt like it was going to explode. I had agreed to their unthinkable plan. I would confess to a hit and run I didn't commit. I their scapegoat, I the broken son. And as the reality settled in, a cold fear crept through me. There was no arguing with them. Logic, morality, even blood ties, they'd sacrificed all of it so my brother could walk free. They wouldn't listen to reason, so I decided to give them what they wanted, at least on the surface. The next morning, I stumbled into the kitchen looking like I hadn't slept in a week. My eyes were rimmed with red, my shirt crumpled, my hair a wild mess. I barely registered my mother's concerned gasp or my father's forced smile. I let them fuss over me, loaded me with coffee and pills, begged me to eat something before I lost more weight. I slumped into a chair and stared at the chipped table, my face a mask of despair. I didn't say much, just nodded when they suggested I see a therapist, agreed to call their lawyer, murmured that I'd do whatever they asked. I wanted them to see me as fragile, lost without their guidance. That performance had to be perfect. By lunchtime, the story we'd rehearsed had already gone out. My dad called my boss under the guise of a worried father, explained that I needed leave of absence because of a mental breakdown following the tragic accident. My mom had texted a few close family friends, priming everyone for a statement that I'd be making. They wanted my public apology video by tomorrow morning, and they expected tears. So I took my phone and recorded a short, shaky clip, me in my dimly lit bedroom, voice quivering as I read a written confession. "I'm so sorry for what I've done. I wish I could take it back. I'm broken and I'll face the consequences." My voice cracked on the last word. I watched the clip back and forced my own tears, replaying it until I sounded genuinely remorseful. Then I sent it to my mom. She replied with 3 heart emojis and a message, "Perfect, you're so brave." While they celebrated, I retreated to my hidden sanctuary in the garage. It was where I'd set up my mobile command center, a battered laptop, a portable hard drive filled with the family's incriminating emails, videos of their whispered meetings, GPS logs I'd copied before they tried to overwrite them, and a couple of discreetly placed cameras I'd installed in the study. I flicked on the laptop, plugged in the hard drive, and scanned the files for any gaps in my case. Every email I recovered had my parents bargaining, negotiating with lawyers and digital forgers. I found a receipt for the hush money, dated the day after the accident. I had photos of stacks of bills, cash envelopes addressed to witnesses. Each piece of evidence was a nail in their coffin. But gathering proof wasn't enough. I needed a flawless plan to release it. I needed a stage. I needed something spectacular that would ensure the world saw exactly who my family really was. So I mapped out the timeline, confession video tomorrow morning as scheduled, then 2 hours later I'd send a package to a local investigative journalist I'd befriended months ago. Inside would be everything I'd collected, unedited footage, raw email threads, GPS data, witness statements. I included a note, "Full story and evidence inside, publish immediately." I also set an anonymous tip to police detectives I trusted, forwarding the same materials. And I reached out to the victim's family lawyer who had publicly lamented the disappearance of key evidence. He would know exactly how to push for a grand jury investigation. By midday, the plan was foolproof. The confession would drop, the world would think I was the villain, and then the exposé would blow their world to pieces before they could even react. It was beautiful in a cold, vicious way. But I couldn't be too hasty. I repeated my role as the broken kid throughout the afternoon. I let my mom guide me through breathing exercises, let my dad feed me lines for the apology, and let my brother pat me on the back, calling me heroic for taking the fall. Every time I felt a spark of rebellion flash in their eyes, when my mother's lips quivered with satisfaction or my father's chest puffed out with pride, I knew I was tempting fate just right. They believed I was cracked, that there was no fire left in me. They thought they could control me. Today they saw only my facade of despair. Tonight they'd wake up to a nightmare. I ended the day writing in my journal, drafting a statement of regret that was as convincing as it was hollow. I ended the day telling my reflection in the mirror how sorry I was, how ashamed I was, how ready I was to do whatever it took to save them. Because my next move depended on them completely underestimating the man I'd become, the man who would destroy them all at once. I whispered into the silence of my dimly lit garage, "Sleep tight, family. Tomorrow your poison becomes your downfall." Then I closed my eyes and let the exhaustion take me, already dreaming of the moment when the world would see the truth. I spent the next morning moving through my family's world like a ghost. To everyone else, I was still the broken kid who'd accepted his fate. I kept my gaze low, shoulders slumped, and moved in slow motion whenever my parents hovered. But beneath that hollow performance, I was a predator, hunting for every shred of proof I could find. First, I installed a covert recording app on Mom's phone while she was distracted at brunch. She left it on the table, buzzing with group messages about my heroic confession. I pretended to wipe syrup from my shirt and slipped the app into her system under the guise of cleaning out unused files. Now every call she made to Dad's forger, every whispered reassurance about altering security footage would go straight to my inbox, unfiltered. Next, I tackled the deleted texts. I knew Dad used an encrypted chat app to coordinate hush money drops with the lawyer. He thought deleting messages would protect him. He was wrong. I borrowed my brother's laptop under the pretense of researching family history for a closure project Dad insisted I start. Once I had it in my hands, I loaded up a portable USB forensic tool, a tiny stick I'd bought online that could recover wiped data. I ran it behind their back, isolating the chat records. In one thread, I found the exact sums they paid off a witness, a convenience store clerk who'd seen the hit-and-run car that morning. They'd wired her $2,000 and coached her on what to say if detectives came calling. That tipped me off to the missing witness. The clerk had oversight. But there was another person who mattered, an elderly mailman who'd witnessed my brother's car parked near the crime scene at an earlier hour, then seen it speed away later with the bumper damaged. The family had overlooked him because he seemed insignificant, a small-town delivery guy with shaky eyesight. His statement could unravel their timeline entirely. I tracked him down at his route's end, arriving in a weathered sedan and offering him a ride home under the guise of thanking him for his time. He didn't recognize me at first. My posture was that of a broken soul. I played the part well. As we drove, I gently probed him about the accident. When he mentioned the timing discrepancy, I eased him into telling me everything he'd seen, all the while recording our conversation on the dash cam I'd secretly installed. But retrieving the dash cam footage was a gamble. I had to break into the station's security room where the camera feed was stored, something I'd volunteered to help the station manager move into the new system before my sentencing. That night, using the gate code I'd overheard Dad share with the forger's contact, I slipped into the locked room. My heart hammered so loud I thought it'd echo off the metal cabinets. I found the server and with trembling fingers, copied the week's worth of footage onto an encrypted drive hidden in my jacket. I returned the files later, with no one the wiser. Every piece of the puzzle started clicking together. The GPS logs, the clerk's payments, the mailman's timing, the camera footage. I even discovered that my brother had rented a cheap motel room to lie low after the crash, leaving footprints in the dusty hallway carpet. I dusted for prints, found partials that matched a glove he'd given Dad, trying to wipe it clean. I cataloged every scrap, every timestamp, every digital whisper. Meanwhile, I maintained my victim act flawlessly, staring vacantly at walls, flinching at sudden noises, tossing my confession script into the trash as if I couldn't bear to look at it. My family believed me broken, resigned. They depraised my courage, my sacrifice. They texted me instructions, checked in on my mental health, shared how proud they were. They thought they'd won. But I was closing in on the final lever I needed, a last witness. I remembered the cyclist coworker at the newspaper office who tried to wave down help that dawn. She'd mentioned a digital camera she carried with her, an old DSLR she used to snap pictures of early edition papers. She'd taken a photo of the license plate before collapsing from her injuries. The family hadn't thought of her because she'd been unconscious in the hospital for days. I tracked her down through social media. She posted a slow recovery blog about the crash. I messaged her under a pseudonym, offering to buy her broken camera from insurance. She sent it to me, and inside the SD card were the raw images, clear, undamaged, time-stamped at the precise moment of impact. There it was, my brother's plate number, dirt and blood still caked around the edges. By dusk, my hidden drives contained everything. Audio of my mother's calls, recovered chats, the mailman's statement, the clerk's document of hush money, the motel print match, and the DSLR shots on the SD card. I backed it all up to cloud storage under an anonymous account, as well as copying it onto 4 identical encrypted drives stashed at safe drop points. If anything went wrong tomorrow, I'd still have the evidence in multiple hands. As I powered down my laptop, I felt the weight of what I'd done. I wasn't just a son playing the victim anymore. I was the shadow investigator, a force they never even suspected was stirring in their own home. I closed the garage door quietly, my heart slowing as adrenaline faded. I walked inside, found Mom at the kitchen table, eyes hopeful, offering me tea. I smiled weakly and accepted the cup, ready to sip down the lies they'd poured. Because the next step, when I unleashed everything, would be the moment they realized how thoroughly they'd been outplayed. And there would be no coming back from that. I arrived at the law office 2 hours before our scheduled meeting, my throat tight and my palms slick with sweat. I parked 3 blocks away and walked in circles until I convinced myself nothing about that moment could go wrong. The polished marble lobby looked like something out of a movie, a silent promise of power and secrets waiting inside. I checked my phone, a single message from Detective Martinez sent 30 minutes ago. "We're in place. You have exactly 20 minutes after the meeting ends. Stay sharp." I tucked the device into my pocket, feeling its weight like a silent partner in my plan. I wore the same battered coat I'd been wearing all week, sleeves worn at the cuffs, collar unbuttoned to expose an untucked shirt. My hair was longer, my eyes heavier than usual, shadows cradled my cheeks. I carried a thin envelope in my hand that contained my written confession, complete with sobbing statements, a false timeline, and a half-hearted apology to the victim's family. The envelope had my signature on the flap. Underneath the confession papers lay a USB drive loaded with every shred of evidence I'd gathered. This wasn't part of what they expected, but I needed to remind myself of my own insurance policy. My family's lawyer, Mr. Carlyle, ushered me into a private conference room. His suit was immaculate, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose, his expression all business. Dad and Mom sat on the opposite side of the mahogany table, their faces lined with relief and just a touch of triumph. My brother hovered near the door, arms crossed, as if he were waiting for the curtain call. As I closed the door behind me, I forced the emptiest expression I could muster, eyes dilated, lips parted in silent regret. Carlyle began by reviewing the terms they'd drawn up. He read aloud the confession script, the public video release schedule, the sentencing expectations. His voice was calm, precise, almost reverent. "Once you sign here," he said, tapping the dotted line on the confession, "we'll release this to the press. We'll ensure you're seen as a young man who took responsibility under terrible pressure." Mom smiled at me and mouthed, "Thank you." Dad's eyes glistened with pride, his hand gripping the table. I nodded, my heart beat a drum in my ears. Carlyle slid the confession toward me and I signed. It felt criminal, like I was signing my soul away. When I finished, I pushed the papers back across the table. "That's it?" I asked in a tiny voice. "That's all I need to do?" Carlyle looked up and smiled, satisfaction evident in the crinkles around his eyes. "Yes, you've done the brave thing." Then I said the words I'd rehearsed a dozen times. I have something else." My family exchanged puzzled glances. Carlyle's smile flickered. "I found these after reconsidering everything," I said, sliding the envelope across the table. They watched as I opened it and pulled out the USB drive. My mother's eyes widened, my father's jaw twitched, my brother stepped closer, frowning. Carlyle raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" he asked, voice still measured. I swallowed and spoke slowly. "It's everything: recordings, emails, financial transfers, security footage, witness statements, proof of the real conspiracy against me." I gestured toward my parents. "You planned it all, you rigged the GPS, you paid off witnesses, you faked the video angles." My fingers traced the edge of the envelope, the tape seal obvious where I'd resealed it. "This drive has it all." The room fell silent, the kind of heavy quiet that precedes chaos. My mother's face lost color. My father stood, knocking his chair back. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. Carlyle leaned forward, concern creasing his brow. "You're bluffing, son," he said, though his voice wavered. "What proof do you have that this is real?" I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone, then hit play on the first audio clip. Mom's conversation with the forger, her voice clear and conspiratorial. Her lip trembled. She tried to shut me down. "That's private conversation." But I was already moving to clip 2, Dad negotiating the hushing of a witness clerk. The tape crackled. His smooth confidence sounded like a confession. In one swift motion, I turned my laptop toward Carlyle and played the mailman's interview, complete with timestamp, followed by the recovered motel print analysis, then the raw DSLR photos. My brother leaned in, mouth open in disbelief. Dad lunged for the envelope, but I held it out of reach. "This goes both ways," I said, voice low. "I send this to the press, to the detectives, to the victim's lawyer, unless I know the authorities are already on your trail." I tapped my phone again and opened a secure group chat where messages streamed in from Detective Martinez. "Team en route, SWAT at suburban home, journalists prepping live feed." Carlyle's face drained of color. My parents stood frozen, their whole scheme laid bare. I sat back down, sliding the confession paper and USB drive together. "I'll destroy this confession," I said quietly. "But only if you cooperate fully with the detective arriving here in 10 minutes. If you try to stop him or if any of this leaks, I'll make sure every bit of evidence goes public immediately." My voice rang steady, unwavering. Mom's tears flowed freely now, but they looked more like regret than sorrow. Dad's posture wilted. My brother's eyes darted from me to the door. Carlyle swallowed hard, nodded, then reached for his phone. I exhaled, faking exhaustion. I'd set the trap and they'd walked right into it. Across the hall, I heard a commotion, a voice demanding entry, metallic clicks against the door. My heart pounded magnificently. This was the moment I'd engineered, the collision of lies and justice. As the door burst open and Detective Martinez strode in, badge flashing, I looked at my family, ashamed, defeated. And I realized how much sweeter victory would feel when it was finally over. I could hear my family's whispered instructions as the meeting began, the spin they'd rehearsed into ink on their notes. "Tell them you saw a deer," my father hissed when Carlyle left the room to fetch water. "Blame the glare," my mother added, voice soft but urgent. My brother smirked, folding his arms as if I were already behind bars and could do nothing to stop it. I leaned forward in my seat, hands folded over the envelope containing my confession, watching them plot my downfall. Then I tapped the table to get everyone's attention. "Before we start," I said, voice steady, "there's something I need to share." The room stilled. My father's eyes flicked to mine, challenge in his gaze. Carlyle returned with a glass of water, paused as I slid the USB drive across the table. My hand hovered over it as if daring someone to reach for it. I think you'll want to hear this first, I told them. I pressed play on my phone, setting it against the table's glossy surface. The recording crackled alive, my mother's voice calm and rehearsed, detailing the plan to pay off witnesses. "You're going to frame him," she'd said. "He'll take the hit, we all walk away clean." Dad's curt agreement followed, his tone cold. My brother's laugh, triumphant and entitled, echoed next. "He'll never see it coming." Mom's face drained of color. Dad's hand flew to his mouth. Carlyle's eyes widened behind his lenses. My brother leaned forward, jaw clenched. I let the recording play through twice, letting every word sink in, every betrayal echo around the room. When it ended, I watched the air shift. Their confident postures sagged. The lies they'd so carefully architected lay exposed on the table between us. At that moment, heavy footsteps approached. Carlyle's phone buzzed. He looked at it, paled, then met my gaze. "Detectives," he muttered. In the doorway appeared Detective Martinez, flanked by two uniformed officers. They spilled into the room, badges shining, hands on evidence folders. Martinez's eyes flicked to the family, then to me. "Mr. Harper?" she asked. I nodded. Mom stumbled to her feet, voice cracking. "This is a mistake," she said. He's been under so much stress." Dad rose, too, looking like a cornered animal. "We were trying to protect him," he began, but Martinez cut him off. "Order," she said in a firm voice I'd never heard her use before. "You're all under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice, filing a false police report, witness tampering, and aiding and abetting a hit and run." Her words fell like hammers. Carlyle sank into his chair, wide-eyed. My brother's smugness evaporated into panic. Mom covered her mouth with her hand, tears brimming in her eyes. The officers moved in quickly, placing handcuffs on my mother first. She resisted, crying, "Please, you don't understand," but they read her rights and led her away. Dad tried to plead with Martinez, his voice desperate, but Martinez produced another recording, my father instructing the forger on falsifying GPS data. He too was cuffed, eyes haunted. I saw my brother shrink back as the officers approached him. He blinked at me, shock shattering his arrogance. When they read him his rights, he finally seemed small and vulnerable, the golden child stripped of everything. Carlyle, pale and trembling, lurched to the door. Martinez held up a hand. "Mr. Carlyle, you're not off the hook. Conspiracy and perjury charges will follow." He sagged against the wall as the officers moved in. The room, once a fortress of lies, had become a cage. I rose from my chair, the envelope still in my hand. I opened it and pulled out the typed confession. "This," I said, voice clear and resolute, "was never meant to tell the truth. It was the weapon they tried to use against me." I set the papers on the table and watched them as the officers gathered up the evidence: my mother's phone, my father's documents, the USB drive. Detective Martinez approached me. "You handled this impeccably," she said quietly. I nodded, my chest tight with relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." She tipped her hat and signaled the officers to finish their sweep. As the last cuff clicked shut on my brother's wrist, I stepped back and felt the walls breathe. The distortion of my life, the lies, the guilt they tried to thrust on me began to crumble. My confession would never see the light of day. Instead, the truth had emerged victorious, razor-sharp, and undeniable. I watched them lead my family out, heads bowed in shame. Carlyle lingered behind, eyes on me, grudging respect in his glance. Martinez closed the door and looked at me. "We'll need your statement," she said. I nodded. "I'll tell it all." Outside the window, sunlight streamed into that room for the first time in days, illuminating the remnants of a plan built on betrayal. As I gathered my things, Detective Martinez paused by the door. "Ready to move forward?" she asked. I stepped into the hallway, breathing in the hum of a world that finally knew the truth. "More than ever," I replied. The gavel of justice had fallen, not with a bang, but with the undeniable clarity of right crushing the poisoned lies of my own blood. And in that moment, I was free. As the officers handcuffed Mom and Dad, the room erupted into chaos. My mother's stunned sobs gave way to furious screams. "He made me do it," she shrieked, pointing at my father as she was marched past him. "He's the one who ordered the GPS tampering." Dad's face blanched and he jerked back against the wall. How dare you pin that on me?" he spat, voice cracking. "You're the one who called the forger, you approved the hush money." My brother slammed his cuffed hands on the table, rattling paperwork. "This is all on you, Dad," he roared, eyes wild. "You promised me you'd fix this. You told me to stay calm while you pressured Mom into paying off witnesses." His accusation hung in the air like smoke. Dad's mouth twisted in pain. He opened it to defend himself, then closed it again, his chest heaving. Carlyle, pinned against the wall by an officer, pushed back desperately. "I acted on your instructions," he insisted to my parents. "You said you needed plausible deniability. You told me to prepare the confession script." Mom jerked her head toward him, breathless with rage. "You villain, you told me I had no choice," she screamed. "You said you'd manage everything." Carlisle's face flickered between shock and indignation. "I am not your scapegoat, you orchestrated it all." Detective Martinez stepped forward, arms folded. "Everyone calm down," she said, voice sharp, but they were past calm. Dad lunged at Mom, grabbing her arm. "You traitor," he snarled. "If you hadn't freaked out, none of this would have fallen apart." She jerked free and hurled a water pitcher at him. It shattered against the wall in a burst of ice and glass. My brother dove between them, trying to separate them, but he tripped and crashed into Carlisle. Papers flew everywhere, GPS logs, financial spreadsheets, witness statements, fluttering to the floor like dead leaves. The officers moved in quickly, shielding Carlisle and separating parents. The lawyer tried to argue his way out, then gave up, sinking to his knees and burying his head in his hands. My brother, face streaked with tears, stared at the mess in disbelief. This can't be happening," he whispered. Mom collapsed into an officer's arms, half sobbing, half hissing at Dad. "You said you loved me," she wailed. "You promised you'd protect me." Dad's shoulders sagged and he closed his eyes. I thought we were saving him," he murmured, voice broken. I watched them unravel, every lie twisting into new wounds. The officers cuffed my brother next, reading him his rights. His voice shook. "He told me to do it," he said, nodding at Dad. "All of it was his idea." Dad looked at him, helpless, then at Mom. "Your turn," he rasped. Mom shook her head, terrified, tears streaming. I just wanted to save him," she stammered. "I never," she broke off as Martinez approached. Detective Martinez cleared her throat. "Mr. Harper," she said to my father, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, perjury, obstruction, witness tampering, and accessory to a felony." Dad's hands trembled as the officer slapped the cuffs on him. He looked around the room at the pieces of his family shattered across the floor, and for the first time I saw regret. Real regret, not the hollow kind I'd seen before. Carlisle rose slowly, shaken. The officers uncuffed him and removed him to one side. Even he avoided looking at my parents. My brother stood leaning against the wall, still processing what had happened. When an officer approached him, he closed his eyes and nodded, resigned. In the aftermath, the room felt empty except for the crackle of dispatch radio and the soft footfalls of the officers cataloging evidence. I slipped out of my battered coat and laid it over my arm, stepping forward to face Detective Martinez. "Do you need anything else from me?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "You've given us more than enough," she said. Behind me, Mom's muffled sobs rose and fell. Dad sat handcuffed, staring at the shattered pitcher at his feet. My brother had collapsed onto a chair, face in his hands. Carlisle hovered by the door, shoulders slumped. They were defeated, exposed, each blaming the other for their ruin. Their conspiracy, their precious plan, had collapsed in a mess of panicked accusations and violent outbursts. I walked past them and paused at the door. My father looked up at me. His eyes held something I'd never seen before, shame, fear, and the faintest hint of apology. I nodded once, then stepped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind me. The final echoes of their betrayal and blame casting faded into the hum of the police station. My war was over. Their undoing was complete, and the only thing left for me was to start rebuilding the pieces of my life. I sat in the interview room, the harsh fluorescent light balanced by the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Detective Martinez slid a thick manila folder toward me. "Whenever you're ready," she said. I looked down at the stack of evidence I had spent days organizing: annotated emails, labeled audio files, GPS logs with timestamps, detailed witness statements, even the shattered fragments of the security camera footage. Every piece had its place, every document its explanation. I took a deep breath and began my statements. "I'm Daniel Harper. On the morning of April 12, I was not at the scene of the hit-and-run that injured Ms. Reynolds. My brother Jonathan was. Over the past week, I have discovered and consolidated evidence that proves my parents and brother conspired to frame me." I watched Martinez take notes, her pen moving steadily. "I installed a recording app on my mother's phone on April 13 after she began receiving calls from the forger. That recording captures her coordinating with my father on altering neighborhood camera angles. I recovered deleted texts from my father's encrypted chat app showing payments to multiple witnesses. I interviewed Mr. Lawson, the mailman, who confirmed seeing Jonathan's SUV leave the crime scene twice, once intact and again with obvious front-end damage. I obtained the victim's co-worker's DSLR images, which clearly showed Jonathan's license plate and bumper damage immediately after the collision." I paused, scanning Martinez's face. She nodded once, silently encouraging me to continue. "I also retrieved GPS data from my brother's rental car, modified by my parents in an attempt to mislead investigators. I have metadata showing the original logs and the altered versions. Lastly, I captured a private conversation between Jonathan and Carlisle, their family lawyer, discussing the drafted confession I was to sign. All of this is contained here. I opened the folder and tapped it. I want to be clear, I am providing this evidence not for vengeance but for justice. I'm not seeking to destroy my family, I'm seeking accountability under the law. Martinez closed her notebook and leaned back. Thank you, Mr. Harper, this is comprehensive. We'll begin the formal review and notify the district attorney's office immediately. She handed me a copy of my statement to review. If it's accurate, please sign here. I scanned the typed pages, every detail, every timeline laid out with precision, and signed at the bottom with a steady hand. Within hours, the district attorney's office had convened a grand jury. By the next morning, formal charges were filed against my mother for conspiracy to obstruct justice and perjury, against my father for witness tampering and accessory after the fact, and against my brother for DUI, hit and run, and accessory to a conspiracy. Carlisle, the family lawyer, was indicted for forging documents and advising obstruction. The courtroom became a daily theater of revelations, each hearing peeling back another layer of the family's calculated betrayal. Journalists camped outside the courthouse lawn, cameras pointed at my old home address, now under police seal. Through it all, I remained in the background, offering additional statements when requested and quietly cooperating with investigators. I hired a modest attorney to handle my own inquiries, procedural matters to clear my name and ensure my legally watertight innocence. When the press asked for interviews, I issued a brief written statement. I have every faith in the justice system. My decision to come forward was difficult but necessary. I hope this serves as a reminder that no one, regardless of family ties or social standing, is above the law. Friends and former coworkers reached out with messages of support. My boss reinstated me part-time to help me transition back, and my landlord agreed to reduce my rent until I fully recovered. The community I'd thought I had lost embraced me instead. Meanwhile, the legal firestorm around my family escalated. Media outlets ran exposés on the thresholds of privilege and corruption, and my parents made desperate attempts at plea deals, accusing each other of masterminding the conspiracy. My brother admitted to drinking heavily and panicked after the collision. His tears in court fell hard, but the evidence was unassailable. The final hearing came 6 months after my statement. I watched from the spectator benches as the judge pronounced sentencing: 10 years for witness tampering and obstruction for my mother, 8 years for my father, 6 years for Carlisle, and 5 years for my brother's DUI and hit and run. Restitution was ordered toward the victim's family, and their lawyer thanked me in court for my courage. As the gavel fell, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Walking out of the courthouse, I stepped into the bright afternoon sun for the first time without dread or guilt. I thought of the wrecked SUV on that fateful dawn, of the cyclist whose life was shattered, and I felt a fierce tenderness in my chest, a vow to honor her through honesty and compassion. The chapter with my family was closed, their schemes exposed, their power broken. I rebuilt my life quietly, returning to work, reconnecting with friends, even tentatively dating again. I volunteered at the local cycling charity in memory of Ms. Reynolds. Each pedal stroke reminded me of the journey from betrayal to justice. I didn't celebrate vengeance, I celebrated truth. My family's empire of lies had crumbled, not because I wanted to punish them, but because the law demanded accountability and I had the conviction to see it through. Justice, not vengeance, had won the day, and for the first time in a long while I felt free.